I'm Ben Smarr. I'm an assistant professor between bioengineering and data science. Do a lot of high-dimensional time series analyses looking at biology as a complex dynamical system. Um, I'm going to try to also keep pretty high level today and just talk about opportunities for engineering that have to do with the things that we don't know. So, we take, in this case, we're looking at the heart rate averaged across 5 million nights on 50,000 people that we gathered during COVID 2020. Um, Anybody that is engineer using data would look at this and go, oh, look, a nice Gaussian, how easy. Building classifiers with heart rate is going to be great. The problem is that when you aggregate sufficiently large samples of data, which of course it's easier and easier to do in more and more modalities. I'm showing you heart rate here, but it could have been temperature, enzymes, anything that we can collect at scale. It starts to look as though it's a nice regular distribution. We can challenge that by starting to break these data distributions down by categories that we already know about. So these boxes that we constructed last century or previous centuries, age, race, sex, all of these things that we try to fit over high dimensional continua, we can use those to label these things. So here, if we break this down by time and age of the individual, what you can see now is that actually this was not even for everybody. This was highly segregated by age. So if I'm looking at the left edge, I'm much more likely to be looking at younger people. If I'm looking at the right edge, I'm much more likely to be looking at older people. So if I built a classifier that was saying, well, good, healthy heart rate's in that middle and everybody else is kind of probabilistically around it, it would have baked in age biases in how it performed. When we look at this, we can also see, let me see if I can pull up a little pointer here. Well, whatever. Oh, you can see my cursor. Fantastic. We can also see there's different timescales of change other than age that are interacting with the distribution of these data. So again, the idea of, as I tell my students, the science is figuring out what is the landscape. The engineering is then fitting things to that landscape. What we can see is there's multiple different timescales that are changing this landscape. So it's a dynamical landscape. We can normalize by age. Again, one of these boxes we know, we can control for it. We still notice that there's all of these timescales of change. So these big spikes are weeks because people on the weekend do stuff differently than they do during the week usually. Then COVID happened in the US, so we can see there's a huge social implication of change. So not only, again, patterns that we know, like age, like the weekends now, but patterns that we don't know. As things are happening around us, our surface is changing. And of course, different people show different levels of these responses, right? Some people have big weekend changes. Some people have no weekend changes. Some people have weekend changes that are stable. Some people have weekend changes only sometimes. Lots of instabilities in this. So what we were doing was we were taking data like this and looking for essentially aberration detection to detect COVID. Looks something like this. Again, by eye, you can say, well, gee, here's when someone gets diagnosed. I can see their physiology, heart rate variability in this case. Could be anything you looked at. HRV is going down, HR is going up. Looks like something's happening. They look sick. Cool. Of course, this is the aggregate across many, many dozens of cases of COVID. What you might notice is that there's all this spikiness before and after COVID, and these are just normal daily rhythms. And so again, naive to time, the distribution of what your heart rate or your temperature or anything else looks like when you have COVID overlaps very nicely with perfectly reasonable, normal daily rhythms of those things. And so the comparisons fitting to the right phase of these different timescales matters immensely for getting the right fit, which is to say, if I take your temperature when you get on the bus, and I don't know if you just woke up or if you've been up for hours, the odds that I can precisely tell you that you have a fever go way, way down. Whereas if I know exactly that time for you, or the time of your menstrual cycle or the time of seasonality, I can make a much more precise prediction. Okay, so we want to be able to generate these AI algorithms. We want them to work on everybody. We want them to pull in all of these longitudinal data. There's all these complexities of timescale. Cool. What are some ways that we can do that? I'm going to suggest that I think for most of you, this is not surprising. Of course, if I have one-dimensional data, two-dimensional data, I can make my little scatter plots. Three-dimensional, now I'm going to have to animate it and rotate it. When we then, let's say, take heart rate, activity temperature, split them by night and day. Okay, now it's six-dimensional. I can't really make a picture of that anymore. Shoot. What about when we start taking statistical derivatives of these things? We end up with these very high-dimensional spaces. We can't really visualize it, right? So I'm going to show you now a sort of a projected, you can almost think of it as a cartoon, but a mathematical reduction of a high-dimensional space into a two-dimensional landscape. So this, again, is those 5 million nights. Each dot is a individual night, again, across about 50,000 people. We can statistically mine this for things we know. We can say, label all of the people that are old, label all of the people that are young, label all the men and women, label all the people of some ethnicity, some condition, and we can train AIs that work within those labeled spaces. The problem is we already know most health algorithms that we've deployed in the world end up generating a lot of bias because they're only as good as the data let them be. That not only misses the opportunity to help some people, it actually causes harm, as I showed from my first Gaussian, where if I trained something that was assuming everybody had this normal heart rate, it might be biased against elderly people, for example. So one thing we can start to do is take the AIs, run their various detection algorithms that already exist, maybe that we pull down from things that are being built up as public resources, which is awesome. We can see in this large landscape where they fail, and we can start to discover people who make a physiotype by virtue of the fact that they're tricking the AI in the same way every time. So we can sort of run over this and start to, through resampling and reapplication of different AI detection systems, find those groups of people that were a kind of diversity that we didn't know about. A subgroup of women, for example, for whom our COVID detection algorithm is failing, independent of the label male-female. And then we can start to say, okay, well, gee, maybe there's one algorithm that works better for this red group, and maybe there's one algorithm that works better for this blue group. Again, if that's, in this case, I've actually labeled these by sex, and so we know that's the case. We, in fact, did this for COVID. We said, gee, why are we getting all these false positives for some of the women in our COVID trial? Well, it's because when you ovulate, your heart rate goes up, your temperature goes up, your sleep falls apart a little bit. And so every month, there were a number of women who looked kind of like they were getting COVID, and the AI, not being very said, oh, well, let's just tell them they're getting COVID. Correcting for sex alone doesn't do anything. And instead, what we had to do was build a system that could detect those individuals with a quasi-periodic, roughly 28-day periodicity in their physiology, which is not women, but it's a subset of women. And then within that subset, we could say, okay, now we can do some dynamic baseline subtraction, and we can raise the performance of the algorithm back to parity with males or non-cycling women. So we have these boxes, right? Sex is a great example, but they cover a lot of physiological diversity that as engineers we're trying to fit. We can do that intentionally. We can also use the AIs to help us see patterns that we didn't know were there, uncover latent diversity, as I'm trying to cartoon here. So, of course, we can only do that for those people that we see, right? Again, most health algorithms that have been deployed are reliably ending up being biased. And again, that isn't just harmless. That sometimes means that you're actually giving a group of people systematically bad advice. This is the first study that's been published. We just put this out, comparing all of the large wearable studies that were publicly available from COVID. And what we can see here in gray is US and global distribution population. We're looking at age, and we're looking left to right at sex. Whoops. And you can see that, for example, we're not covering very well as an industry yet, elderly or very young. Of course, there's a historical sex imbalance. We recently had a piece in the Washington Post about this. The president mentioned it in the State of the Union. There's this persistent historical thing about excluding females from research. Statistically, doesn't need to happen. But there's all these other things we're not including in this graph, right? We're not looking at ethnicity. We're not looking at things that are maybe latent diversity like chronotype, any other kind of physiotype. And so if we can't get data on people, we can't make algorithms that fit them well. And hopefully I've helped convince you that assuming that if we haven't seen them, the algorithms we do generate will just generalize to them well is dangerous, is not responsible. And instead, there's this opportunity to say, as we can get more different communities to engage, we can start to discover kinds of physiological diversity that we didn't know about, which then help us understand the kinds of complexities that actually generate human physiology and health, which is very exciting. So I'll end with that. I'll say thanks to all of these wonderful people and funders that make this stuff possible.